able to see. And I want to welcome you all. We're very happy today to have Jerrigrace Lyons and Shannon with us from Final Passages, an organization that's been around since 1995. It was founded to inform people about little-known funeral options, natural death care rights and practicalities, green burials, and benefits of bringing funerals back into the home and into the family's care. Jerrigrace is a minister, a death midwife, an educator, a home funeral guide, and a Reiki Master. She's also the author of Creating Home Funerals. Shannon teaches with Final Passages and has a private practice as a home funeral guide, coach, and consultant. She's passionate about advanced health and death care planning based on personal values, and we are very aligned with that. In Mission Hospice, Sally's mantra is to live like you're dying and to die like you're living. And with that, I would like to invite Sally and Jerrigrace to turn on your videos, and the rest of the afternoon is yours, and we'll be together until 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Can you hear me? Everything good? Can you hear me?
Yes, I muted myself so not to interfere. Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Sorry, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you, Susan, for having Sally and I on today. We're very excited to be sharing information with everybody. And because this presentation is a lot about ritual, I'd love it if we could all just start with a couple of deep breaths together and bring that, all the people who are showing up today, to a beautiful unity and resonance. So just a couple deep breaths. And just feeling your feet grounded on the beautiful earth. The energy coming up through your feet and down from the heavens. Meeting at your heart. And feeling that beautiful, peaceful place within your heart, within your body, that lives in each of us. Sometimes it just takes a breath to find it. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So just to share quickly about my beginnings and starting Final Passages, really began long before that, 32 years ago, in fact, when I took my daughter to the island of Kauai, and we were invited to a puja ceremony in a Hindu temple. And we were invited to go up to a beautiful 3-foot tall crystal and make a prayer. And that prayer for me was to find a career path that would be of service to everyone, to assist everyone in some way, and also to fulfill something within myself, something that was meaningful. And 7 years later, that prayer came into being. It wasn't until later I realized, oh yeah, this is what I prayed for. Because it was something I never expected. And that was through the death of a dear friend. She was a Reiki master, and I went to her home every week. And one day she went to work because she was a nurse. She was caring for someone in their home, an 80-year-old woman. And after breakfast, my friend said she wasn't feeling well. They called 911. The paramedics came quickly, and they pronounced her on the way to the hospital. They weren't able to keep her alive. So a phone tree was formed. The next thing we knew, we were showing up at her house that night, and her longtime friend of 20 years, Norma, said that Carolyn had written out instructions and how she wanted to be cared for after she died. And what she said was she wanted to be brought home and cared for by her family, and not, or her friends, and not be turned over to a mortuary, and not be embalmed, and not be taken care of by them in that way. So we ended up bringing her home from the hospital and caring for her in her home. And that experience was so transformative for me, and so awakening, that the washing of her body, the dressing of her, the carrying out all of her wishes, doing ritual and ceremony with her in her own home, just allowed me to see that there was another beautiful way to care for our loved ones when they die. And out of that, a year and a half later, I started what is now called Final Passages, but was then family, it was called Natural Death Care Project, and transitioned later. So now here we are, 25 years after starting the organization, and we are doing a lot of education, and we are, I've had the immense privilege of guiding about 450 families through what we call a family-led home funeral. And the family stays in charge, and I'm there just guiding them and helping them through it. Sally is now one of my assistant teachers. She is the main assistant teacher, actually, for our courses, Honoring Life's Final Passage, and we're going to get into that later. I'm going to start our little slide presentation so we can show you some of the things that we want to talk about today, starting with the home funeral and what that looks like. And then we're going to move into what people can do during COVID-19, and also if this pandemic should spark up again some other time. So people are more prepared on things they can do in the future. Okay, so I'm going to begin. Let's see.
And while Jerrigrace navigates to the next slide, I want to add that when we talked with Susan about doing this program, people were not, they were dying in the ICU and being cremated and buried without any care by friends or family. And that's shifted, but we've included some slides about circumstances where the things we'll talk about today are still applicable. So this isn't just specific to COVID, and I think you'll appreciate some of those options. Go for it, Jerrigrace.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, we're going to be jumping in and back and forth and all that kind of thing, activity. So this is just a slide about our Final Passages, and that we were founded in 1995. And our initial mission was to educate people about their rights to care for their own loved ones after they die, doing all the post-death care and so forth that I discovered when we cared for Carolyn. But later we expanded into conscious dying and end-of-life doula teachings, work. So we found that a lot of people wanted to just learn how to sit with people and help guide them as they're dying, and doing the many things we can do that are not medical. So we've expanded a lot in our courses and teaching, and I just wanted to point that out. So it's really a holistic approach of conscious dying, end-of-life, doula work, and natural family-led home funerals and green burial options. Oops, going the wrong way. This is just to introduce us. I'm the founder and director of Final Passages, and Sally, beautiful image there, is has started her own business of threshold coaching and consulting. So a family-led home funeral is where the family really makes all of their decisions and their plans for how things are going to go. And we've written a guidebook, Creating Home Funerals, so people, if they need suggestions on how to plan, they have a whole planner there, fill in the blank planner, and what things they can do during a home funeral, and even how to fill out and file the death certificate themselves. So a family can do all those things autonomously and just possibly just drive the body at the end to the cemetery or crematorium of their choice. This slide shows that children often get involved in all kinds of home funerals. The 11-year-old boy, there's Jules, has all his friends with him as they decorate a casket for his 38-year-old mother who died from cancer. And so all the children get to participate, and it was beautiful to watch them do this. I keep going the wrong way here. And then, of course, this is also a lovely example of someone lying in honor or lying in grace at home. That's what I often refer to it. I think Sally says lying in love. All are applicable and beautiful to describe what our beloveds look like after they've been lovingly cared for by families, washing them, dressing them, preserving their body with ice underneath, tucked underneath. And then families have come and visited them. They can have informal or formal ceremony with the body. So that's one beautiful example. Those ribbons all had writing on them done by all the people who loved her. And so then they just wound it around her. Here's another example of a person who was cared for at home. They washed, and the family washed and dressed him in one space, and then brought him in to another space in the house where everyone could be able to visit him.
I'll add to that he had a full body autopsy, which is one of the reasons the little cap is on his head. And a lot of our students and friends and families ask, can we do a home funeral for organ donation or full autopsy? And here's an example of a fully autopsied body.
Thank you, Sid. This is an example of a granddaughter putting makeup on her grandmother after she died. Again, not just children, but all age people can be involved in decorating the boxes, caring for the body, doing makeup, placing ice on them, decorating many things. We had one family take old lace pieces of their grandmother, sew them together and have the blanket lying on top of them. Or it could be used to shroud them afterwards. So there's many creative ways, and we're going to be showing you some of those as we go along. And this slide is to really show you about our history. The history in this country, in America, is this is what we call traditional, the home funeral. Families up until the early 1900s all took care of their own loved ones. They usually died at home, and then they washed their body and kept them at home until they dug a grave on their cemetery at home, small cemetery for the family, or it could have been at a church, in a church cemetery yard. But this was the tradition, and all we're doing really is reclaiming, restoring this beautiful tradition back into our culture today, because we realized early on, well, me from taking care of Carolyn, how much was lost when we didn't have this very special time to be with someone.
And Jerrigrace, I didn't notice this when we picked this slide.
Mm-hmm.
You can see in the background that there's actually some ritual and ceremony going on. Mm-hmm. In this photo. You see candles. It looks like that's probably the Virgin Mary. Mm-hmm. She has a rosary, and there's a cross on her. So those are examples, small examples, but for them probably very meaningful examples of ceremony and ritual.
Right, there's the Bible right there on the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And for many others, people will place their favorite books alongside them, or other meaningful objects that that they wish to adorn them with, you know, have around them. And sometimes stuffed animals, and just depends on that person's very much a way of personalizing who they were at the time. This is a book we want to point out to people. It's a resource that people can use if they're not sure if they live in another state or they have relatives in another state or friends. If it's possible to have a home funeral in other states, I'm going to say right now that you can wash someone in your home in any state. You can wash their body and do ceremony and ritual at home. But the laws do vary from state to state, and there's about 10 states where families do have to have a funeral director involved, usually to sign off a death certificate. But the other 40 states, again, you can do all the paperwork, you can file everything, and in many states you can bury them right on your own property. California, it's much more difficult to do that. But this is a good resource if you want to be able to find whether, you know, all the laws for each state. So we just wanted to point it out to you. And they have many other interesting things in the book too. Lisa Carlson did write a book called Caring for Your Own Dead back in the 1990s, after caring for her husband. So she really was one of in the forefront of the movement of home funerals.
Okay, we're going to look at 2 slides here about the nature of ceremony and ritual. And these slides actually grew out of a presentation that I did at the main San Francisco Public Library. I joined a panel there. We did a program on loss and grieving our beloved animal companions. And we just had these 2 comments, which I'll let you read it yourself for a moment. Because we wanted to make the point that there are real important reasons, not a reason, that cultures through the ages, there are funerary elements found with Neo-Neanderthal man, burial with a femur bone. There were funerary objects. So this has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. So there's one comment about that. Jerrigrace, can you move it to the next one?
Mm-hmm. Mm. Oh,
there we go. Rituals heal the pain of letting go, at the same time connecting us with things greater than the earthly concern. And that's certainly important right now, given how many people are dying, not just of COVID-19, but other kinds of life-limiting illnesses, and their families aren't able to be with them as they're dying. Next slide. There was one before that. That's okay. Go on to COVID, Jerrigrace.
Okay, so we're just gonna, and now as this pandemic comes along, everybody has to make a shift, as Susan said earlier, and we're all, everybody was trying to figure out ways to cope with what we were being asked to do with the sheltering in place. And so with the pandemic, there were new rules, and deaths of people who died from COVID usually were happening in the hospitals. So there was no way that people could even visit them, let alone be with them when they died, or bring them home. So they were generally just taken off to a funeral home right from there. So it was just absolutely heartbreaking. I know that many of you know this and have felt this, and have friends who have felt this, that people could not visit them in the hospitals or at the mortuaries. People weren't able to come to witness them, to have a ceremony there in their chapels. And it was just excruciating for many people. Then there's a whole lot of other ways people were dying and still separated from their loved one. And this goes on all the time. People who can't say goodbye. Maybe a person's lost at sea. We had a client whose mother went on a vision quest up in the mountains. Everyone took their own spot to camp in, and then we're all supposed to reappear in the morning to have their morning meeting and breakfast. And this woman did not reappear. And they went off to look for her. They found her tent, but no sign of her body. They did a full-on search with dogs and helicopters and everything, and were not able to ever find her body. So that's another example. We just don't know ever what might happen. Air crashes from planes and many accidents. All animals are lost sometimes or disappear from during a fire, during many other things that happen. And then there's the sadness of when people can't travel to be with their loved ones who are dying. Many people are cut off, unable to see them. I've talked to a number of people that were feeling just so bereft from not being able to fly to another state and be with their mother or their father when they were dying. And then people got also stuck in another country, unable to come back. So all these things. And then there's this community grief, this huge amount of grief that can happen that affects everyone in our country. The George Floyd's death, the tsunamis, wildfires, floods that we've had here, earthquakes, tornadoes, many different activities on the earth that have separated us from our loved ones. So this is what we wanted to address today, is different things people can do when they cannot be with their loved one as well as when they can. So we've brought creative alternatives, and we're just going to go through and show you some examples. This is an example of a painted casket. Families have the hundreds that we have seen. I have hundreds and hundreds of pictures of beautifully decorated in every different way imaginable of the casket. People will put stickers on them, write notes on them, paste photographs on them, and you'll see some other examples. But this is a way people can still say goodbye. I want to say that they can talk to their mortuary and ask them if it's possible to have them deliver a cardboard cremation casket, which is what you're looking at here. And then they can decorate it if there's a whole family living in the dwelling. Another way they can allow community to participate is by placing it in a driveway and organizing times where different families or individuals can come and decorate. They can put the crafts and the paints and the stickers and everything out by the casket in the driveway or a backyard, and people can come one at a time or small groups, if that's allowed, and decorate them, or a larger family, and each make their contribution. So that's, this is at the cemetery, and they can be at home when the body is picked up, and they can be placed in the box before they leave the home, or, you know, even by the people in the transportation service can place them in there, or the family can place them inside the box. And this is what, it starts as a brown cardboard.
Jerrigrace,
Oh,
can
yes.
I just jump
Sure.
in to say that we
Sure.
also included these couple of slides so that you could see this accordion-like feature that's underneath the cremation container. That's called a church truck. And transportation services are the people who typically come to pick up, or what they call recover, a body when there's been a death in the home. And they oftentimes will use a cart similar to this. However, when they bring that body in, they put the body into a plastic bag. So we're going to talk more about ways that you can create ritual around the departure of that person, both to, if your worldview is that their soul is making a transition, so that you can accompany them, and also so that the people who love that person or care for that person in their life and in their dying times can continue to express that care of concern when they turn that body over to people that they don't know. So we really wanted you to see that cart there, or the truck.
Yeah, it's a rather expensive piece of equipment. It was quite a while before we purchased it after starting my practice of guiding families. But it has been very, very handy for helping people get the box around from one place to another. It starts as just a brown cardboard box. Actually, it's flat. And when we get it from the funeral home, and my husband, Mark, has stapled it. You can see the staples in the corners using a commercial stapler. But you can also use duct tape or packing tape or electrical ties by poking holes and winding them around. So there's many ways to put them together. And then we encourage families, if they can, to paint them with a backdrop of white or a pastel color. So then other people can paint on it like it's a beautiful canvas. And they can add poster paints and all different things to the white surface, or light lavender, blue, or whatever they want to put on it. They can begin to add or stencil, or however they're going to decorate it from there. And here's some examples of this. You can see the sides are brown cardboard on the, that's the one with the clouds. That's the inside of the lid of the casket, because the young woman wanted her mother to look up at clouds when she was lying in the box. And then the lid, when she turned that over, she painted this beautiful picture of this nature scene, and so that her mom could be in, I guess, be in this beautifully painted, looks like a river going off on its journey into the sunset. So we love this beautiful picture she painted. Symbolic imagery for sure. And gentle goodbye. These are just examples of fabric and different things you can use. You can use them both to shroud a body, to place in the box, so when they're laid in the box, they are placed on something soft or something lovely, something decorative, something that belonged to them. It might be a quilt that one of their mothers passed down to them, or somebody in the family. Can be anything, really. We've had young men put on sleeping bags because they love to hike and love to camp out. So there's just so many ways people can use fabric to cushion the casket and or shroud the body, to make it look like they're tucked in, very cozy. Here's some other examples. There's a woman in San Francisco who has a business. You can find her online. It's called Kinkaraco, 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 and she makes beautiful silk shrouds like this gold one you see. She has many different fabrics with different designs. And then in the other part of this picture is one of our family members who's covering her mother when they were out of the room. She found this beautiful gauzy material, covered her face, and she looked really beautiful. You could still see her face, but it was more to honor her. To she just wanted to make her mother feel shielded from the outer world, feeling kind of tucked in again, so that yeah, just in respect to her, she would cover her when they left the room, and then people who wanted to see her face, they could peel back the veil.
And I want to add again, the reason that we have these slides in there was what we were speaking to earlier, not only the tenderness of being in the container or the casket, that when a body is recovered, many transportation services are going to put the body of your loved one in a big black body bag. It's stiff, it crackles, it's cold and impersonal. And it is probably one of the most painful things, because that body is leaving the safety and sanctuary of their home. And the people who, you know, brushed their teeth and took the mats out of their hair and, you know, kept track of their medications and straightened their sheets so that they could be comfortable. And now all of a sudden they're going to release this person into a plastic bag. And so we came up, and especially with COVID-19, COVID patients who die at home, they're going to whisk that body out even faster. And so we came up with this idea of shrouding a COVID-19 patient, but we think it applies to most families, that when that person is leaving their home, they're saying their last goodbye, is something the family can do to be tender and have a sense of power and control over this thing that they have to surrender to.
Yeah, there's so much, thank you, Sally, there's so much loss of control, the death itself, and so many other ways. So this is one way they can shield them from that body bag. Once they're wrapped in that shroud, at least there's that. They themselves, the family themselves, have placed this around them in something that's very personal and has meaning to them, before they're placed in a body bag and covered with the plastic, which is, yeah, not very nice. So then there's this idea: families can build cairns, and they can do it in their backyard, or they can do it by a place of water. Many people do that near water. I wanted to show you this one because this woman, Melissa, is a dear friend and of both ours, Sally and mine, and her 21-year-old son died quite suddenly, and her whole family came to support her. It was a large family. They stayed at a place up by the Russian River, and her son loved to make art in nature. So they all decided that they would, in his honor, build these beautiful cairns and using the river rock. And then everyone had their own design, as you can see. So very lovingly done.
And prayer flags. These are, if you ever want to have fun, Google DIY prayer flags. And I'll tell you a couple of examples, although we don't have the actual images. In one case, there was a stillbirth, and the grandmother gave these pieces of fabric to everybody who came to the home funeral. And everybody wrote a gesture, a prayer. And in another slide that you're going to see in a moment, Brian, did Brian get taken out? I guess so.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll stick with this one. This one's more colorful. But I'll tell you Brian's story, which is he was a very young man with a teenage son died in a motorcycle accident. And there was a lot of youth involved in his leave taking, and they actually were able to make flags that have photographs of the person who died, and they draped those around the home. And these don't have to be for a living in-person ceremony at home funeral, the full Megillah. It can be something that you do when somebody goes into the ICU. It's something you can do when this is the doula part of the work that you can do when somebody gets a life-threatening diagnosis. It can be something that you have if someone dies in the ICU and they are immediately cremated and you're not allowed to be there for the cremation. You can still do this. It's an activity you can do, and it'll bring the essence and the love and the energy of that person who you're grieving for into your space and in memorial. And these pictures are from Jerrigrace and I took, and some of you on this call, I think, may have taken a class to be a funeral celebrant. And we each did our own little skits as funeral celebrants, and we each got a little scenario. And in this case, it was for a neonatal loss, and the baby was being cremated with the family at the side of the cremation retort. And all the friends in the family who couldn't be there because of COVID-19 outlined their hands, sent them to the family. The family had an 8-year-old son, and the way the son participated in this death of this baby was to cut out all those hands, those handprints, as an image of support, holding the family in their love. And they put all those cutouts into the casket of the baby who was to be cremated. And she was cremated with all these loving hands in her cremation container.
I just want to add, that's so beautiful. And then of Brian's casket, everybody actually did a hand print by dipping their hand in paint and putting it in there. But also my dear friend Deanna, who died in January, everybody had pieces of paper, and they drew around their hand, cut out their hand, and it was put on a wheel, so going outward. So there's this on a piece, glued on a piece of cardboard. So then there was this wheel of hands going out, and everybody wrote things on each hand to her, to my friend Deanna. So that's just another idea that I recently came across.
Thanks, Jerrigrace.
Sure.
And this was another thing we did in that training, is that we suggested that you could write love letters. You could write requests of forgiveness. You could write letters of gratitude. You could ask for forgiveness. You could give forgiveness. You can write anything you want. You can write poetry. You can put their favorite joke on a piece of paper and put it into the container. And I'm looking at the time, so we should scoot to the next one.
That's the writing of letters.
This is actually, this was something that Zenith came up with. And if you can't do a home funeral, somebody's been asking in the chat box about why talk about home funerals if you can't have home funerals. And we'll speak to that in more depth in the Q&A. But if you can't have a home funeral, some people are writing what they would have done if they could have had a home funeral. So they're scripting it out and feeling those feelings that are coming up and thinking of the things that this person was about and what their relationship was with them and how they would express that. Would they sing them a song? What would the piece of music be? Would they have their favorite foods beside them while people were visiting them in their home? What kinds of things, and each of you can think about what kinds of things you would like to have for your own funeral. And the next slide.
Yes, so I'm sure almost all, if not all, funeral homes will tell the family member when the cremation is going to take place. Many families, no matter what religion or spiritual path that they, or none, still want to know, so they can sit in reverence, in meditation during that time, thinking about the person, lighting a candle for them, just connecting, staying connected with them through this light, through this beautiful light of candle. Candles have been used forever around deaths.
And before we go into the amazing, is that woman like?
Yeah,
Such an amazing
beautiful.
place. Yeah. I wanted to, Jerrigrace, I neglected to say when we had the script and the pen, is that another thing people can say if their person dies in an ICU or in an accident and is never recovered, is a sudden unexpected death, is that you can write after their death, what would you have said to them had you be able to be by their side?
Right.
Or if you had been able to be with them once they had died. My death plan has a script for what I want people to say to me if I die suddenly. So that's another thing that you can write about.
Great.
Okay, so this is a fictional invitation to a home funeral for Christine Victoria Johnson. And she had a home funeral. And but it was all on Zoom. And the people who were in her role-playing group made this invitation and sent it to all the rest of us in a class. They set up a Zoom meeting for the home funeral. They had a camera in the bedroom. They had the deceased in her shroud on the bed. They had decked it out as though it was a home funeral during COVID. And if a family has cared for somebody during COVID-19, and the person didn't die of COVID-19, they may have died of cancer. They may have died of multiple sclerosis. They may have had acute respiratory syndrome secondary to another disease process. People still die at home during COVID-19 and have home funerals. So this is an image of the beginning of inviting people to a home funeral on Zoom.
Altars are, am I taking this one, Sally? Altars are really very popular and used all the time. And Brian, who you saw lying in honor earlier on our slideshow, there were altars, I'd say 5 different altars that were created for him, including some outside and ones inside. So all of them had a different theme. Most of them had pictures of him, but not all of them. But it just gave the feeling that everywhere you were, there was, it was focusing our attention on that person who died and personalizing things about him. So this
So
is,
before
yeah.
we go on to that slide, I want to back you up, Jerrigrace, and ask you if you can tell the story about the family that called you. This was early on during the pandemic, and I think it was an uncle who had died.
Right.
But they did, and you gave them ritual in nature. Do you want to tell that story?
Sure. There was a woman, actually, she had come to our monthly film and death film and discussion, Let's Talk About Death event that we have had every month before sheltering. And she was familiar with home funerals, and then her uncle died, and she did know to make an altar, but she felt like she wanted to do more than that because she couldn't be with his body. And so she called and we chatted for quite a while. And then I said, what, because she had 2 young children and she wanted a way for the whole family to memorialize him. So I said, well, what do you think about taking a paper bag for each one of you, small bag or a baggie, anything that would hold some things in it, small things, and going out into nature, either in your neighborhood or to a park. And each one of you could look for things in nature that would remind you of some of his personality, of, you know, just things about him that just stuck out, maybe his sense of humor, or some way in which he reached your heart. And she loved that idea. And I said, you also, in talking to me, you said that he was kind of stuck and bitter. He had been at the Vietnam War, and he was generally unhappy with his life. And I said, so maybe you're looking for something that would lighten things up for him, you know, in another world. And she said, oh, like a feather. And I said, yeah, if you came across a feather, maybe that would speak to you of helping him lighten up, or feeling his burden lifted now that has made that transition. So she loved it, and she took out her children out and her husband, and they all went out and collected things. And then I suggested that they bring them in and place them on the altar that she had created, and maybe even make a heart out of them around his photograph. So it was really wonderful co-creating that with her.
Okay, altars. So some people refer to these as earth altars, although a friend of mine who has studied the ancient and mythical practices and traditions of indigenous people and so forth said that a true earth altar is much more specific and exact and has a specific architecture. But contemporarily, earth altars are referred to as taking things from nature and creating any kind of design. It can be symmetrical. It can be suggestive of a movement, like a spiral or a whoosh. And this gentleman, his are called mourning altars, and it's MOURNING. And I'm going to have a resource list, which Susan has offered to send out when I finish it. All of you will get that resource list, and I'm going to include this fellow's information. And this has everything from, you can see seagull feathers and cypress and moss, and in the very center you can see that's a flattened out primrose.
You just reminded me too, Sally, that somebody, and I don't remember their name, came up with the idea of using a telephone. I remember at our conference, somebody set up a little telephone and a chair because you had mentioned earlier the role play and what you would have said to the person who talked with them. And so that's certainly what we do with children in role play. We give them little toy telephones, and they're talking to daddy or mommy on the phone. Well, we can do the same thing. And that's what that telephone booth was all about, was that you could go in a private place and talk to them on the phone and say what you would have said if they were still alive. And that's, yeah.
So this is my personal altar. This is the decluttered version. I have many more of my people, as Angela Hennessy calls them, on my altar, and many sacred images. You can see a little hummingbird down there, and Jerrigrace's mother's earrings are on the rock. And the feature on this was my dog Duffy. And he was my first pet as an adult. And I was in recovery with post-traumatic stress disorder. And he became my therapy dog. And he was my healer. So he was the first installation, and now it has grown by leaps and bounds. His ashes are just to the left of his photo. Many people with animal loss, but with humans. I have friends who have a corner of a room that's dedicated to their altar. They put big pieces of driftwood and drape fabric over it and put favorite images and so forth on it. So the sky's the limit, figuratively and literally, for what you can do when you create an altar. And it can be very living and very healing. And then here on the left-hand side, I'm going to send to you contact information about Monday Hearts for Madeline. And we weren't able to get her permission to use her photographs, so we put this in there as a placeholder. Every Monday, this woman's beloved partner, Madeline, had died. She had a very severe diagnosis and died in like 4 months. And since then, which was in 2015, every Monday she has made a little heart in nature, in love of Madeline. And one of hers is a driftwood heart. So I found this image that is branches from nature made into a heart. And then we kind of recapitulated the hearts on the right.
The hearts on the right, the blue ones,
mm-hmm.
those were when Mark and I traveled to the UK to teach our work. There was a funeral that happened just as Mark and I arrived, and our friend who was bringing us over, sponsoring us to teach, and we taught with her. It was her client who died. And so all of us around the table, family members, decorated these little hearts. It's like a Mod Podge you're using, and they're some kind of glues, and then you have a variety of cutout pieces of paper, and everybody made them, and then they were used at the memorial service for him at the church. Later they were put in a beautiful basket. This was Melissa's, right? Yeah. Do you know about this?
Mm-hmm. But go ahead, you're speaking, so continue.
Okay, this was again Melissa, dear friend whose 21-year-old son died very suddenly. This was again out at the river, and they were still doing many different ways of celebrating his life and memorializing it. And they were using rocks, and they spelled out his name here, Jack and Khalil.
Those are his initials, not his name.
Right, just the initials of his name. And then they also used sparklers. And at night when it was dark and somebody was able to capture a photograph of all of them spelling his name, initials, and it's beautiful, a beautiful thing to do also. It was a really fun thing to do. It was a summer activity, I guess, before the fires.
Right, or between the fires.
Or between the fires.
The emphasis on that one too is both the activity and that it's in nature.
Yes.
Okay, so we have some pet remembrances here. I've had the privilege and the challenge of working in humane medicine and in shelter medicine, as well as in a veterinary ER and an ICU. And I've seen a lot of death, and I've seen a lot of people have very complicated grief because of the nature of our bond with the animals in our life, and that our culture pretty much dismisses that. And particular to this presentation, we're talking about animals that disappeared, and Jerrigrace named a number of those, and we've referred to fires and go bags. If both of the adults in our house, we have a plan that if we both go to the ICU, what happens to our dog? And not everybody makes that plan. So those animals are oftentimes left, and they even get stolen out of front yards and sold to labs, to laboratories. So animals disappear. They run away. They chase after a deer. And here's a slide of people who took these are both dog bowls, and they turned them into succulent and cactus terrariums.
Beautiful.
And here, how many times on Nextdoor, anybody who's here who's on Nextdoor, how many of you read about the parrot or the parakeet or the cockatiel or the lovebird that took off and they don't know where it is? And even if that animal never comes back, their feathers are still there. And there are people that you can find on the internet who will actually paint an illustration on your feather of your animal, of the type of bird. This, in this case, was a lovebird. And this, this is from one of our friends at Final Passages. Her beloved little big dog, actually, Cleo, died. And it was old age. And her dear friend, another adult, had a daughter who felt unexpressed about her grief. It was her first significant death. And she came up with the idea, she was probably 12 or 13, with making Cleo the dog's cabin of kindness. And that's how she remembered Cleo.
It's adorable.
And you can't see what it says in there, but these are tennis balls on a beach. And it says, in loving memory of Phoebe. And the family who had Phoebe put all their tennis balls in this dishpan with an invitation to other people on the beach to take the tennis balls and throw them. And of course, they encouraged them to bring them back so other people could throw them. But it was a way that they expressed a huge part of that dog's life and their relationship with that dog.
Good.
And lots of people love to do rocks. You can have them done professionally or you can do it yourself. And this is one of my favorite sentiments: no longer by my side, but forever in my heart. And that's dedicated to Sasha. And I can imagine Sasha being cremated and buried and them putting this rock over the burial of the cremated remains.
Let's see, will that go back? That just reminded me of the sentiments on a card, Sally, that said, it had a person walking along with their dog, and then their dog was gone, and it said, not gone, just gone on ahead.
Aw. It's hard to find condolence cards for animals, by the way.
That's one of my favorites. I hope I can find it again. It's
Buy a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Did we get the slide with the programs on it?
Oh, we did. Oh my. Okay. Yes.
There it is.
Yeah. So this is about our organization, which has grown. We have an inner core council now of about 21 of us. People came together about 4 years ago and wanted to go on and do much more training past our graduate program. So we came together and talked about how we could reach out to our community, do more education, and also have me take people out and so they could shadow me and do a lot more hands-on training with the families. So now there's a number of us. Of course, Sally has started her own business. Some of the other women are close to that, but actually most of us like working in tandem. It's really helpful in so many ways. There's a lot of details to take care of, and the family feels really cared for. And, you know, in case one of us should disappear for some reason, either out of illness or we're called away somewhere or we're traveling, then the other person is familiar with the family and they can fill in. So that's our core council. And then we teach and have been teaching since 2000. So that's 20 years now of educational programs called Honoring Life's Final Passage. And we have 3 levels. The first one is on conscious dying and end-of-life doula work. The second one is midwiving or being a death midwife and home funeral guidance. Also covers things like green funeral options, green burial, which we didn't really get a chance to talk too much about. But we do talk about all the green options. There's water cremation has been approved in the state of California, and I think we'll see more of that soon. It uses a large vat where people are placed inside using water, hot water, steam, lye, and it reduces the body to a liquid and some bone. At the end of that liquid, it can be used out on a field. It's sterile. It won't hurt anything, and the bone matter can be given to the family just as it is with fire cremation.
We just passed human composting.
Recompose was passed in California.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm glad to know. I was asking Holly Blue the other day about that. And Katrina Spade, who came up with Recompose in the state of Washington, got it legally approved and is working to build the first model of that, where again, the body is placed in a large vat with a certain material for decomposing the body, but it's all ecologically sound, it's all green, and it decomposes the body in a very short time, like 4 to 6 weeks. Then those bone fragments, I assume, can be given to the family if there are any, and again, it's a way of composting, and many, many people are very attracted to that form of green decomposition and burial. Doula, I see, is spelled incorrectly on this slide. Sorry, we didn't have a chance to, it was done very quickly at the end and didn't have a chance to proof it, but it's doula is D-O-U-L-A. And it's about being with women, being with alongside birth doulas, have been operating in this country for quite a while now. They help the women through labor, and the midwife is the one who usually is there for could be there as a doula and as a midwife, but they're the ones that usually help catch the baby. But the doula, the birth and death doula, they're there primarily to support the person, either who's birthing or in this case, who's deathing. And they're there to write letters for them, to give to family members. They're there to help them create legacy projects, putting pictures in an album, doing many wonderful things that people need support. They need to also know that they have contributed some wonderful, wonderful ways in their life. They need to feel like their life was meaningful. And so these are ways a death doula can help them feel that way. And then again, we have monthly Let's Talk About Death. This is our community outreach, and we're coming up on our 25th anniversary celebration. We were hoping to do it in February of 2021. It's actually December, but then we pushed it to February because December's so busy with holidays. And then, so we're hoping by February of 2021 that we can come back together in groups of people, but all that remains to be seen. We might do it by Zoom. We're looking at all different ways to do it, but it is quite a wonderful feeling for us that we're coming up on 25 years of our work in the community. And now there's a national organization, the National Home Funeral Alliance. So we have really pushed out, and this whole movement has expanded tremendously.
And let's not forget your book.
Oh yes, yeah, which I did mention a couple times, but Creating Home Funerals, that my dear friend Janelle McCrae and I co-authored way back in at least 20 years ago, more. I think 1997 is when we wrote it, because we were getting calls from people in other states who we couldn't help through their home funerals. We couldn't be there. So we thought, oh no, we have to write a book about this so people can do this wherever they are. And of course, I've edited it many, many times as I've learned more and more things. I have learned most everything I know from the families I've assisted. They have been my teacher as well as me being their guide. So I keep adding things to the guidebook as I learn from them, and also from our students. Sally and I have learned so much from our students who bring so much to the classes we teach. we hope we'll be back to doing that in person soon. So
Well,
that,
It's just not the same on Zoom.
yeah, that's the end of our, let me see if I can.
I want to thank you both so much. I know we're going to go into questions. We'll get the screen share off.
Oh,
Yes, perfect.
yes, there we go.
There's
Yay!
everybody. Hello, everybody.
Hi,
Oh, that's so great. Yay.
It's wonderful to see people's faces. Welcome to you all, to those that may have arrived a little bit after we began. And Sally, just the whole, so many of my memories were coming up when you were speaking. The first one was the first time I saw a person immediately post-death, but not yet, like at the funeral home where they tidy everything up. And he was at home with myself and his dad and a couple of his friends who was caring for him, a 40-year-old guy who died of brain cancer. And it had been a really, just the way it always is when somebody dies and you've been caring for them. It was shocking that it wasn't surprising he died, but it was shocking when he was actually dead. Mm-hmm. And so we bathed him, we changed him, we had promised him we would not send him out of his apartment in diapers, so we took care of his body. And then, as you said, the funeral provider arrived, and his dad and I were left. We went and sat in the living room, and without telling us, because they had been very sort of respectful when we were in the room and suggested, they put him in the body bag. And then he had a very steep staircase getting out of the second floor apartment. And so the last image, his father, I remember sitting on the couch and just putting my hand up over his dad's eyes, because his foot, he was a tall guy, so his foot was hanging out of the bag with a tag flapping. And I just thought, I called that funeral provider and gave him a piece of my mind, but I just felt like, my gosh, for his poor dad, who had such a hard time, and then kind of relaxed into like, he's going to die and we're going to do this perfectly. And for that to be his last image was just heartbreaking. And then in my own dad, when he died, our family, my father was in Kentucky. It took me some time to find a funeral provider, because I said, like, we're from New York and California. This is going to be really different than anything that you have ever seen before. I can guarantee you that. And they agreed to take my dad's body. And what we wanted to do is have him he didn't want a casket. He didn't want anything really. He was going to be cremated. So we just got the box for him. And my uncle came and he wanted to see his body. So we brought him to see the body. And when that happened, every one of our family members had some memento that reminded us of my father. And so we put that in the box with him, so that when he died, he'd be cremated with those things. And the funeral director later on said, 1% of the people here in Kentucky, this was in 1995 when you were just getting started, 1% of the people in Kentucky get cremated. So right from the beginning, this was a little bit different for all of us. But they were so respectful of like stepping outside of their kind of prescribed way that funerals happened. And it was very beautiful. And my mom just died, and I went actually this time to the crematorium with her body and had them take the box lid. I want to make sure the right person was in there before I put her in. And I was just very grateful to have that last. She hated going anywhere by herself, and I expected going to get cremated was no different. And so I was very grateful that they let me. It was a tiny little town in northern Washington, that they let me come and do those things, because for myself, it just felt complete. It felt like we had seen this whole thing through together. And
Wow.
So for people that can do this at home or have some ability, when I saw, I was like, that would have been so beautiful to have painted that box. And I don't think that Northern Whidbey Island Funeral Home was quite there yet, but so I would just like to open this up. Somebody I know that was here, that knew my friend that died, just sent something in the private chat. So I'm wondering if there's...
Can I respond to what you said?
Sure. And then I know there's a couple of people that have questions up. I want to make sure we get to those.
So what you just described is a real arc of how the whole death positivity movement is changing in the country. And you and I have talked about this many times and been in workshops together about it. And it's individuals can empower themselves. There's generally no laws that say you can't just ask for whatever it is you want. It's just that
Yes.
most people have given over that power. And sometimes people will have a home funeral guide or a death doula. Not all death doulas deal with after death work. All home funeral guides do after death work. If you have somebody who you wanted to contract just for that piece of it, to help create ceremony, and I found I made a mistake once of not being there when the recovery people came to get the body, and it kind of went sideways. And if I had just been there and greeted them at the door instead of the family opening the door, and explained to them what the family was doing and how they wanted to handle this, and let them know that this family had values and spiritual practices, and that they would love to be respected and supported by that, it would have gone very differently.
Yes. Yes. I have been, when I've been with people who have died, when the recovery folks come, I always tell them at the door, you have got to treat this person like it's your mom. Like, you have got to treat this person who you don't know at all like it was your mom. And do not, like this family, myself, like this is somebody that we love. So for the most part, I think people try to do as good a job as they are trained to do. But I want to open up the questions. There's a couple of questions. I know, Penny, if you're still here, you had a question earlier and it may have been addressed. Mary Pert has a question also. I would invite people, because it's hard to see all of you at one time, if you move your cursor to the bottom of your screen or to the top where it says participant, there's an option to raise your hand. And that is the easiest way for me to track who has a question here. So I'm going to see if, Mary, do you want to ask your question or do you want me just to read it? And you're muted, so I'll read it. As soon as I find it again, here we go. So Mary Pert says that she's attending 2 Zoom memorial services in the next 2 weeks. How is it different from a wake or a traditional funeral service other than just being, in a room with the people and the body, in terms of emotional impact? Because you're kind of alone, but you're also in a virtual group of people. What's your experience been with these online services and the impact for people who can't then finish the service and turn around and go get coffee and have some donuts or some lunch or congregate with the people that they would normally be doing this with?
Well, I would just say that we both did that role play at the course that we were in, and they were actually very moving. I was surprised that, I mean, it can't replace the feeling of everybody being together in one room and hugging and holding each other and weeping together. But surprisingly, people were able to produce a lot of emotion. They did individual settings. Some of the people created either an altar, like one of their fictional characters that died was a hiker, loved nature. Or she set up a scene with boots and a backpack, and she was sitting outside where there were trees around, and it felt like we were all in nature with her.
Okay.
So creating the scene, each individual actually could take a piece of it and look at a different aspect of their life and create that in their window of space. And also, I was just part of an 8-year-old on Zoom online. I was just a participant, I wasn't the minister or anything, but I was just there because I had helped the family. And they did a whole beautiful slide montage of her life, which was shown on Zoom. And that was also very moving. Each of the people who spoke about this little girl's life was just, so it's kind of strange that you're sitting there crying alone, but then when we watch a movie that's really moving, we're sitting in our living room sometimes bawling. So yeah, you
I
know.
would also add that it is generally more evocative than you think it's going to be. I mean, the one that we did, it's a fictional neonatal death, and everybody in the class was crying while we were doing the mock funeral.
Yeah.
And so that's the potential there. So if you're going as a guest or as a mourner, which I think may have also been part of what Mary was inquiring about, maybe not, but if that was part of the question, is to know that ahead of time, and to have whatever kind of self-care you need to have for afterwards, because as you just said, Susan, that there's no coffee clutch, there's no hanging around at the cemetery after you put the roses on the casket, there's no let's carpool together and you drive home together, there's none of that socializing to process what has just happened. So I think that's an important thing to be aware of, both as a celebrant, but also as a mourner. And I think it was Penny said something about we're going to be doing these, these kinds of memorials and services and so forth for a long time. Maybe not across the board, but it's going to last. And I think we'll develop more protocols and understandings about how to have ritual and an emotional healing experience in 2 dimensions.
Well, and also I think we'll be combining a lot more now. There was like 30 people at this service for the 8-year-old, but they also had the Zoom on for all those who couldn't be present, or they didn't want any more people than that to come. So they had to choose their most intimate friends and family to be there present, and the rest were invited to Zoom.
And cemeteries make decisions. The individual cemeteries decide what their rules are. So some places are going to let you bring 100 people, and some people are going to tell you you can bring 10 and they have to be in their car and they have to have a mask on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, very individual. And also the family, because I found that even though the cemetery, in this case, the cemetery was allowing up to 100 people, but the family chose to only have 30 people. That's all they were comfortable with. So it can be a co-created decision.
Yeah, I'm so, moved in so many ways. I mean, I don't wish this pandemic on anybody, but I am just so, on a daily basis, amazed at how adaptable human beings are. And, even just to be able to have a conversation like this about funeral planning, to be able to have a funeral service, in Zoom or online, of course, up close and personal is best, but, so many people just had to pivot on a dime, and in 3 months' time have had to recreate things that have been kind of traditional. Well, actually not traditional, just what we know in our lifetime, because probably, 80, 90 years ago, as you were saying, funeral practices happened in people's homes. My grandparents, their parents died, they were laid out in the dining room table, and, the neighbors came and the family came and the community came, and that changed up in then what we were used to growing up was you go somewhere to a funeral home where everything's, sort of looks good. So now here we are in yet another phase of how do we grieve collectively, acknowledge people's lives in a meaningful way that's aligned with who they actually are, and recreate something that we've just known to be this way. So I just really appreciate all of you being here. I wonder if there's any other questions, and if somebody does have a question,
I see
something coming up here in the chat. Stephen, he's one of our regulars now, which also couldn't have happened before the pandemic, because it would have been a long trip from Honolulu to Mission Hospice and San Mateo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is, I can certainly read Stephen's question here. Recently in Hawaii, people are utilizing medical aid in dying. Here in California, it's commonly referred to as the End of Life Option Act. Across the country, where this is legal, in the states that it's legal, it's referred to in one of those 2 ways. It is not assisted suicide. It is a legal addition to the end of life options that people have for them. And what Stephen is saying is that they're seeing that more often people utilizing medical aid in dying are also using doulas, and that the doulas are being referred to them by physicians, which is another huge adaptation. And I'm wondering, in your experience, is that true here also in the mainland?
I'll jump in, and then Jerrigrace, I'm sure you'll be able to add on. The East Bay End of Life Doula Association is working actually actively with Kaiser to have a liaison between their doula association and Kaiser Permanente. And one of those women, who actually was one of our guest speakers on a movie night, her doula practice is only for people who are exercising the End of Life Option Act. So some places I had to change Kaiser doctors because I couldn't get my doctor to talk to me about my advance directive. But then there are these other doctors who are like engaging doulas. So it's kind of soup to nuts from my experience. What do you think, Jerrigrace?
Yeah, it varies. I have talked to a number of end-of-life doulas who are wanting to do this work with people who are choosing to end their life. And I was able to attend my friend in Hawaii in January at her end of choice, and they call it something, our choice, our something. It's different in Hawaii. Like you said, Susan, it's different. All the states have a different name for it, but End of Life Option Act here. I've been able to assist several people, and I think it's wonderful work to be able to be. The family needs a lot of support, because there is a difference in how it feels when somebody chooses to end their life, because one day they're up talking. I had a woman in her 80s, and she just was in excruciating pain and said she just didn't want to go on living her life without having more freedom. I mean, she could hardly get to the bathroom, and she was very independent. She didn't want any caregivers coming in and taking care of her. But it was very hard for her family after, because they were up looking at I was over at their house. They were looking through photo albums and talking about the past and their lives together and reviewing all of that. And then she was going to end her life the very next day. So going from sitting up in the kitchen talking and being so animated, and the next day she's out of here, so it's like that. It's more like a sudden, unexpected death, even though people are trying to plan for it, trying to be prepared for it. You never are. And so I think that it's very helpful for the end-of-life doulas to want to take this on, to be able to not only help the person who's dying, but also be there for the family doing follow-up visits and helping them through what that felt like for them and how they're dealing with their grief and things like that. So
yes, and I hope everybody, of course, makes their own choices, but I hope that people are able to find hospice programs that can support these kinds of choices. I know that's difficult in some places. Mission Hospice had a very thoughtful process in place for months before this became legal in California, and I'm grateful that we're able to support people who are interested in this as an option at end of life. And in addition to having their hospice volunteer, to have doulas that are available and that can also follow up as a sort of addition to what the bereavement team can do in terms of providing support is a wonderful thing for people. As much support as people can get at end of life and in the months after death, I think is as long as it's appropriate support, then that's a fantastic option for families. And Stephen says in Hawaii, it's the Our Care, Our Choice Act.
Yeah,
right. Yes. Yeah. I knew our choices in there.
Anybody else here? We are at 3:28. Does anybody would like to have the last question?
I have Marcia's. Do you want to hear Marcia's?
Marcia, yes. And some people, yes, please.
Marcia says, why is the body put into a plastic body bag? I thought that was a real good punchline.
Sterility. I mean, they're just trying to protect themselves, the people who pick them up, and also they don't know what the person's body
Right.
has gone through, and so it's just trying to protect everybody involved. They don't mean harm by it. It's just a protocol that's been put in place.
And they're picking up bodies from all
Over.
deaths, not just somebody who's in hospice care with their loving family standing by the door to wish them a fare thee well.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
There are some pretty difficult deaths that those people, and they just use the same protocol with every death.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm reading here about Francis has posted just a comment here about a friend who lost 7 cats. 7 of his cats died when his house burned down while he was having his home rebuilt. The memorial statues that he had put in place for his pets were stolen.
Oh.
And yesterday they had a small ceremony honoring those family members that were 4-legged. Yeah, it was such a moving thing. I think people can be very moved virtually or in person. And certainly when the option to be in person with people that you love could really compromise their health or your own, then to have something that's viable where you can be with people, it's of incredible value. I think, if we had the option of not having this presentation or having it on Zoom, I'm so grateful that we did Zoom. I appreciate everybody that's been here. Somebody also asked, maybe the plastic bags are to prevent infection also.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
If a body's died of septic shock.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I will be following up with everybody. I want to thank Jerrigrace and I want to thank Sally so much for this presentation. I understand that we will not be sharing your slides, but I'm going to do, I've been working away trying to get audio from these presentations available for people. If there's anybody here that actually knows how to do that, just email me, please. We will be following up with resources that were mentioned during this training, and Sally and Jerrigrace, if you could send them to me fairly soon after this, because I'd like to send this, the resource email, because we include an evaluation out as soon after this as is possible. And I hope to see you all. Our Movies at Mission Hospice begins a week from tonight, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Pacific time. So for those of you that are joining us from like the UK, that'll be way past your bedtime. Even probably from the East Coast, unless you're a night owl like me. So all of our events can be found at missionhospice.eventbrite.com. We offer a weekly Tuesday morning Pacific time from 10 till noon Death Cafe. We have some regulars from there that are here today. And we're also, for those of you that just can't get enough Zooming, tonight is a new to grief workshop with our wonderful bereavement coordinator, Christine Kovach. If you're anticipating a death, if you've experienced a death and aren't maybe interested in a weekly Zoom support group, this would be a wonderful presentation, and you can find that at missionhospice.eventbrite.com, and it starts at 6 p.m. So in just a couple of hours. So thank you all. And
Thanks, Susan. Susan, you're so great.
Thank you.
Thank you.